The Zera Shimshon for this week's Torah portion at Parashat Tavo. We are coming to the end of our Torah. Those of us who are learning, whether it be the Chumash or the Zera Shimshon book, we see we are coming already towards the end. Being that this is the second to last class for this year, so already the mode of Rosh Hashanah, the mode of prayer, of mercy, of God is in our mind in a very, very strong way, and with the help of God we're going to illuminate this week's Torah portion and come with great practical advice and skills to apply to our life in the merit of Zera Shimshon. Amen. We're going to start. If anyone has a Chumash, that's fine. If not, that's fine as well. We're on page 1068. That's the beginning of this week's Torah portion. The beginning of this week's Torah portion tells us about a fellow, or most of the Jewish people. When they're going to enter the land of Israel, there are things they are going to have to do. Namely, conquer the land. What do you do with land once it's conquered? You either build on it or start preparing it to have it produce and give one food in order to live. Now, there's only so much you could build on land. Most land is used to plow and to give grain and fruits and vegetables and everything that it's there to give. So the Torah says, when you come to the land, Vayaki Tavo el haaretz, when you're going to come to the land of Israel, the land that God gave you, you're going to v'yishta v'yashavta ba. You're going to inherit it. You're going to sit on it. You're going to be there. Velakachta, the next step the Torah says is, you will take mireshit peri, kol peri ha'adama. You're going to take from the fruit that the land is going to give you, asher tavi mi'artzecha asher Hashem Elokecha noten lach v'samta batene, v'halachta lamakom asher yivchar Hashem Elokecha l'sheken shemo sham. And what you're going to do is you're going to take the first fruit that's going to come from this land. You're going to put it in a tene. Does anyone know what a tene is? It's a very interesting word. It's a basket. Okay? You put this first fruit in a basket, and you're going to bring it to the place where God is going to reside, which namely is going to be the temple, the Bet HaMikdash. Now when you take it, this is the last verse we're going to read for now, Uvata el HaKohen, you're going to come to the Kohen, Asher yeh b'yamim hahem, that's going to be there at that time, V'amarta elav, you're going to tell him, Higadti hayom l'Hashem Elokecha. I'm here and I'm saying to God, Kivati la'aretz asher nishba Hashem lavotenu tet lanu. I'm here and I'm here in the land that God swore to my ancestors to give us. So in our terms, just to play out what would take place is, you'd come to the land of Israel, you'd start plowing, start working your land, you'd have your first fruit. Your first fruit you would take, you'd put in a basket, you'd take it to the temple. You come to the temple, you're going to tell the Kohen, okay, this is a gift for you, which it was. It was a gift to the Kohen, the concept of giving back. We'll get into that. Then, the Kohen is going to now take this with you and wave it, and you're going to give it to him in such a manner. When the person bringing these fruits would actually be giving them, he would then have to say something. He would have to give a quick recap of Jewish history up till that very day of him being there. It's very weird. The Torah says, you're going to say the following. Let me find it for you. First is, you're going to say, Arami Oved Avi. Who was that? Jacob. Jacob, my ancestor, our forefather, he was being tricked by Arami. Who's the Arami? The trickster? Lavan, his father-in-law. And that is what caused him to leave his father-in-law's house and then come back to the land of Israel. Then what happened? We're saying in a very quick recap. Vayered Mitzrayma vayagor sham. Then the Jewish people, they had to go down to Egypt. Unfortunately, they were in exile. After that, they screamed to God. And God saved them, brought them out, traveled in the wilderness, entered this land of Israel. Land of Israel, you gave me this land to work on, and here's the first fruit. So a quick recap and prayer and thanks to God was done at this moment. The concept of giving back the first is a very, very special idea. We will address it more after the Chidush of the Zera Shimshon. However, the first is always the most important. It's like the first time you've been somewhere, the first time you met someone, the first time you've tasted something. There's always this aspect of a first. Of course, a person loves all their children, but there's the concept of the firstborn. I don't want to say this, but there's the concept of the first wife, right? Or first husband. There's something to be said about the first for everything. There's first grade, okay? There's always a very special room in one's heart and one's mind for the first. Coming and giving the first of one's very own produce or gift that God has gave them is a major statement, and we will hone in on that in a couple moments. The Zera Shimshon now asks two questions based on Rashi's interpretation. Rashi says, firstly, as follows. The verse told us, you're going to come with this basket of fruit, El HaKohen, not to just any Kohen, Asher yeh b'yamim hahem, the Kohen that's going to be right there during those days. Well, gee, duh, no? Who else are you giving it to? To the Kohen that passed away? Or to Aaron a Kohen? Or to someone other Kohen? Obviously, that's the Kohen you're giving it to. So you know what Rashi says? Rashi says, you're going to give it to that Kohen no matter who it is. No matter whatever standing he is. Whether he's very important, whether he's less important, whether he's wise, whether he's not too wise. That's the Kohen you're going to bring it to, because that's the Kohen that's in front of you at that moment. Okay? To that, the Zera Shimshon says, 1 second. What type of warning is that you got to give it to the Kohen that's going to be there? You don't have any other alternative. It's not like you're going to the Kohen to ask him, well, what would be the law? Or what would be the case? Or what should I do if? Then, of course, you need someone who's qualified. But this Kohen is just acting as a messenger for God for you to fulfill your mitzvah of bringing the bikurim, the first fruit, and he's accepting it as a gift. The Zera Shimshon wants to know, what's this whole idea of whoever the Kohen is going to be? Doesn't seem something so important. That's the first question. The second is on when Rashi continues and he says, V'amarta elav, and you're going to tell him that you're coming today thanking God for the land that he gave you. Rashi says you're going to come to him and you're going to articulate, I am not ungrateful for this. The Zera Shimshon says, what speaks more? And in marriage, this means all the world. Is it what one says or is it what one does? Actions speak loudest. And that is a fact of life. We expect certain actions from our children, from our spouse, from our teachers, from our students. In every realm, we are always looking for actions because it's very easy to just say you're sorry or just to say you're grateful. But what reciprocation, what action is there to follow? It's better, as we would all say, for someone to be nice or act nice or to do something rather than say they'll be nice or excuse themselves for it or any of the alternatives. So the Zera Shimshon wants to know, what does the Jew who is bringing this basket of fruit need to say, I'm not an ingrate, I'm not ungrateful for this gift that God gave? By him coming and giving back the first fruit, he is making an action, he's demonstrating that he is very, very grateful to God for giving him this fruit. So these are the two questions that Zera Shimshon asks. Again, why? What's this whole warning about any type of Kohen that's going to be there, even if he's not qualified? And then the second of why having to articulate the idea of that you're not an ingrate, that you're actually grateful. Comes the Zera Shimshon, and he tells us the main mitzvah, the main action that is done while bringing the bikurim, the first fruit. And that is unpopular to most of what we know, is the fruit is actually taken and it is waved up in the air. It's not thrown, but it's waved. And it's waved in a specific manner. The owner of the fruit, the one who's bringing the fruit to the Kohen, actually holds the basket, and the Kohen puts his hands under the person who's bringing the fruit, and they wave it up and they lift it up together. That is, the Zera Shimshon explains, the main purpose, the main way to fulfill the mitzvah of bringing this first fruit. Seems okay. So a little wave, right? What does that have to do with anything? So he quotes to us the Talmud. The Talmud says, and again, this is sometimes very hard for us to connect to because back in the day it was a very agrarian culture. Everything was about the land and fruits and vegetables. Today it's more of, we could have used to call it a gold age or money age. Today it's plastic already, right? It's a very different type of world, and it's just numbers on a screen. It's a very different type of world. But when you're living in the mindset that everything revolves around the rain and the land and produce and switching and swapping fruits and vegetables. Okay, so your friend has certain fruits and vegetables and your other one, and then everyone together makes one big fruit salad. Okay? It's a very different world nowadays. But listen to what the Talmud says is the main purpose to raise these fruits up in the air with the Kohen. The reason the Talmud says is, by raising these fruits, we are blessing and pleading to God to spare us from any hard rain or dew or any weather conditions that will be detrimental to the growth of next crop to come. Aha. So the Zera Shimshon says, you know what? What does that mean? That means if I'm coming with a basket of fruit, I need something from this Kohen. I need this Kohen's merit and blessing to also help me, because he's the one putting his hands under mine and he's the one helping me raise it. It's going to be through him that my fields are not going to have the wrong type of rain, the wrong type of dew, the wrong type of weather conditions which are detrimental. Now I'm not looking for any ordinary Kohen. I'm looking for a Kohen that has merit. A wise Kohen, a righteous Kohen, a special Kohen. To that the Torah says, the Kohen that you come to the temple with and the one that you meet, that's the Kohen you go with. You can't say, no, this gift, I want to give it to a special one. I want to give it to the Kohen from my town. I want to give it to the Kohen I gave it to last year. No. Whichever Kohen you come to, Asher Yeh Be'amim Ahem, whichever one it is over there, all the Kohanim are equal. You're going to bring it to them. But you might say, but there might be an older one, a greater one, a more righteous one, a more pious one. This is a very special mechanism in the way the mitzvah of bikurim, this commandment of bringing the first fruit, works. The way that the bounty and the blessing is spread when it comes to the produce of one's fields really doesn't come from the Kohen or from the person bringing it. It comes from God. And it's in God's loving kindness that He spreads that bounty all over. God says, I don't care whether the Kohen, this the Zera Shimshon tells us, whether the Kohen is intending with special intentions and Kabbalistic intentions and all these special prayers. No. As long as he is just a pure person, he doesn't need to be the greatest, but he's a pure and he's an honest person and he's there at that time, go with him. Don't say and start choosing, I want to go with this Mr. Cohen or that Mr. Cohen or someone else. Go with whoever you land on. Continues, the Zera Shimshon says, now we understand why the person bringing the fruit needs to articulate the fact that he is not an ingrate. He's coming and he's saying, I am not ungrateful, rather I am grateful for what the Lord has blessed me. It sounds redundant. The Zera Shimshon says, no, you know why? You know how the other nations blame the type of or the amount of produce that comes to the land? It's based on weather, could be luck, it could be the zodiac, could be the stars, the moon, the sun. Basically science and nature. Now the Jews, as we all know, we are very, very easily influenced, are going to start, could be, thinking the same. Oh, this year was better than last year because of the weather conditions, because of the constellations in the sky, and whatever else happened. You know what the Torah wants you to realize? That the blessing that took place in your land last year was based on that Cohen that came and helped you wave it up. It doesn't matter who the Cohen was. He was there. He was accessible to you at that moment. and he helped you lift it and bless those fruits, thanking God, you have to come and say, I'm not ungrateful for the Kohen of last year. It doesn't matter if it's the same Kohen or not. It's expressing and verbalizing that gratitude. It's not a mistake. It's not someone else. It was that Kohen, and we need to thank that person who stood up and was there for us. Still, we have that question of, well, action speaks louder than words. But when the words and the actions are in sync, that means even a lot more than actions alone. Our sages tell us as follows: that speech is the bridge from internal to external. Meaning, when your external is showing or doing one thing, by you articulating it at the same point, at the same way, you are making that point so much stronger. By the way, that's the reason why we make blessings before we fulfill different mitzvot. Do you know there was a time, we spoke about this was pre-King David, there was no blessings for mitzvot when you fulfill the commandment. When King David came and instituted there would be 100 blessings a day, then more blessings started getting introduced. What's the purpose of making a blessing? Why is it that when a man dons a talit, or when a man puts on his tefillin, or when a woman lights her Shabbat candles, or takes off her challah, or goes to the mikveh, why is there a bracha made over there? I'll tell you something you may not know, that a mitzvah fulfilled without a bracha still counts. It's not like if you don't make the bracha, you didn't fulfill the mitzvah. If you lit Shabbat candles, you didn't make a bracha, it still counts as if it was lit. If you put on a talit or tefillin, and you didn't make the bracha, it still counts. So what's the point of the blessing? The point of the blessing is to articulate and to say what you're doing while you're doing it. It turns on your mind in a stronger and higher dimension. You're taking the external and now you're internalizing it at the same time. And this is the reason why it is so important that when the Jew would come and bring their first fruit to the Kohen, they would also articulate that they are grateful, that they are not ungrateful, because it's specifically due to the blessing of God through the Kohen that helped me last year that I was able to come and bring this first fruit this year. There's a couple lessons I wanted to bring from this piece of the Zera Shimshon. The first being this concept of any Kohen is fine, all the Kohanim are equal. In life, we sometimes have certain choices and we sometimes don't have certain choices. And now let's just speak about a certain concept. Okay, let's take a step back for a moment. When it comes for you to hire a certain professional, sometimes you have the luxury to go for the best in the profession and sometimes not. God forbid a medical condition. Sometimes you have time to get a second, third, fourth, fifth opinion, which by then you're probably confused and might not be the best idea. And sometimes you don't. God forbid sometimes someone finds themselves in the ER and they need to go with whatever is being taken place at that time. You sometimes do have the choice and sometimes don't. Sometimes you need an architect, an engineer, an accountant, a dentist, whatever it is, and sometimes you need to go with the first person that is presented to you, and sometimes you have chance and time to go look for someone else. When it comes to learning Torah, we sometimes do have the opportunity to seek out where or from who we want to learn Torah. However, one thing which we have to make sure is that the people that God puts in our lives are there for a reason. You sometimes meet a certain professional, you meet a certain doctor, a certain accountant, a certain engineer, a certain whoever it is, a certain rabbi. God puts them in your life, and you have to kind of say, there must be a reason for this. Now, this is not being naive, because very often you do need to seek for another opinion. But if God put you in front of someone and they might be the only chance and your only resource at that moment, you need to take them as it is. Very often you have a certain doctor, a certain professional that all you're doing is you're comparing them to their predecessor. or to generations before. This is a mistake that the Jew could have made while bringing the fruit. Why am I going to go with this Cohen? Why am I not going to go with the Cohen's father or Cohen's grandfather? Or Aaron a Cohen, or Aaron's children. They were much greater than this person in front of me. God says, you bring the fruit to the Cohen that's going to be there. When it comes to learning Torah, can we compare any modern day rabbi to the previous, nevertheless, compared to any generations way before? Impossible. You just cannot compare them. On one aspect, we should say, well, the rabbis today should be smarter than the previous generations because they have more accessibility to so many more things. The fact is, that's not the way it is. That's not the way stuff works. You compare the previous generations to these generations, it's not the same. There is a dwindling, a degeneration of the generations. So now what? Are you going to use that as an excuse? I'm not going to learn from him. I'm not going to learn from him. I'm not going to learn from this one, from that one. You're not going to learn from anybody? On the contrary, you need to see what God puts in front of you and you need to go for it. Now, as long as it's not heresy, and as long as it's not something counterproductive. But we're talking about if it's someone that maybe you think I could find someone better, well, until you find someone better, keep on being engaged and learning at that time. That's one lesson I wanted to bring out. The next is this idea of always being grateful for someone for the efforts that they put on your behalf. This Cohen, last year, did great effort for you, prayed for you, blessed you. How many times does a person appreciate what others do for them, maybe when it's not so visible what they did? This is a sensitivity the Torah is teaching us in this week's Torah portion. That Cohen from last year, you're coming back and you're articulating how grateful you are for what he did, because there was part of his effort which seeped in to the blessing that you have in your life that you're able to come and thank God for at this moment. One last thing on this part, I want to quote the Midrash. The Midrash says that through the mitzvah, through the commandment and the fulfilling of this commandment of bringing the first fruit, there's enough merit, meaning the world was or should have been created just for the fact of the fulfillment of this mitzvah of bringing the first fruit. And to that we all ask ourselves, well, what is so great about this mitzvah that the world was or had merit to be created just for this mitzvah? What's so special about this mitzvah of bringing the first fruit? As human beings, we have a great misconception. We think that the harder we work, the smarter we work, the more creative, the more innovative we are, is what we create. And what happens as time goes on, as we start building and creating and making and performing, we start thinking of ourselves in a godlike manner. And then we forget kind of what our purpose in life is. Our purpose in life is to connect to our Creator, to realize, to look for our Creator in every aspect of our lives. But then the problem is once we start building and getting in the real and deal of every single aspect of our lives, we start forgetting our mission and forgetting our purpose. We start forgetting about God. You know what bringing the first fruit means? Bringing the first fruit, a person could think, I conquered the land, I bought the land, I built the land, I put together all of this produce, look at my handiwork. No, you're taking that and you're giving it back to God. You're saying, this was not me. Not this and not the rest. None of it is me. It's all only Hashem's. It's all only in His merit and in His doing, in His allowance that this ever happened. When a person plants something, do you think, or do we think that it's the planting that allows it to come out? No. We did our effort, and God causes the result. I don't remember if we spoke about this last week or 2 weeks ago, but the difference between effort and results. We, unfortunately, only look for results, but that's not us. Human beings, the only thing we can do is efforts. The results come from above. It comes from God. Any effort to make, effort to build, effort for anything at all. That's all we're able to do. And when we start getting in that realm and understanding that that is a reality of the world that we live in, a lot of things start making sense of when things are successful and things are less successful, or unfortunately even a complete and total failure. All we have to do in our lives is make the effort. It's invest the appropriate time into doing whatever it is that has to be done. The results we await for from above, from God. And this is why the whole world would have been worth it just to create for the mitzvah of bringing these bikurim. Because when you bring these bikurim, just like the fact that we have and the mitzvah that we have to redeem the firstborn child that we have, and to also bring the firstborn animal from the animals that we have, all of that concept is the firsts. Because as we said earlier, the firsts hold a very special place in our heart, and the first is the first opportunity that a person has to, unfortunately, kind of become arrogant and think, look at what I did, look what I created, look what I was able to put together, look what I was able to form. When you come back and you bring that to God, then you're able to prove, no, God, it was you, and I'm recognizing it's you from now, and I'm going to recognize it's you all the way long. And this is why the whole world should have and could have been created just in the merit of bringing the mitzvah and fulfilling the obligation of bringing the first fruit. The Torah continues, and this week unfortunately is a very heavy parasha because there are the tochecha, which are the warnings, the rebukes that God gives. Well, this time it's actually Moses delivering them on behalf of God for the unfortunate event if the Jewish people will turn away from God. But this evening we're not going to pay attention to that. The reason by the way, why we read this portion towards the end of the year, as our commentary says, because we want tichle shana v'kilelotea. We want the year to end with any curses that it might have had, and then tachel shana ubirchotea, and then the new year should start only with blessing. But this evening, since it's close to the end of the year, I want to address the Zera Shimshon's interpretation on one of the blessings that there is in this week's Torah portion. The blessing can be found in chapter 28, verse 12. I'll quote to you the verse. The verse says as follows: Yiftach Hashem lecha, God is going to open for you et otzaro hatov, His great vault, amazing treasure. What's it going to be? Et hashamayim latet mitartzecha beito. Hashem is going to open the skies and allow rain to fall and come at the right time. Ulvarech et kol maaseh yadecha, and bless all of your handiwork. The Talmud says, why can't the Torah just say, and bless your handiwork? Why all of your handiwork? What, some handiwork yes, other not, would be our first thought. Specifically all. So the Talmud says, you know what? Not only is God going to be blessing the rain that comes down for your produce, but God is also going to bless the coins in your wallet. Interesting. So the Talmud says there's two blessings in this verse. There's a blessing on the rain, and there's a blessing on money. The Zera Shimshon says, what's the difference between the two? Or rather, what's the connection between the two? Like, what's going on over here? The coins and the rain and the coins, isn't it all the same? So he answers by saying a primitive way of looking at it, or on a simplistic way of looking at it, yes, it's all the same. Because when you have a lot of rain, you're going to have a lot of produce. You'll be able to sell the produce in time, and then you'll be able to turn that into money, and then you'll have a lot of money. But he said that there is a deeper meaning to the fact that the Torah splits the blessings. Because if you say it the first way, well, then it's the same blessing and it's just doubled up. Why? So rather, the Zera Shimshon says and explains why there's two separate blessings, one on the rain and one on the coins or the money that one has. Before the continued Zera Shimshon, I want to quote, he didn't quote this, but I'm sure it fills in very nicely, with a piece of Maimonides. The Rambam says, this is something which unfortunately we may be a little disassociated with, but the Rambam says there are certain allowances that a person is allowed to live outside of Israel. Unfortunately, we all still live outside of Israel. We yearn the opportunity to move back. But there are certain allowances that gives a person, that gives a Jew, to leave Israel. So the Rambam says the first is in order to, I want to do it in his order. The first is in order to learn Torah. For example, if there would be a greater yeshiva or a greater learning opportunity outside of the land of Israel, then you would be allowed to leave living Israel and go there to learn. I would say nowadays maybe the only excuse would be a different language barrier, because all the Torah learning, the greatest of Torah learning, is in the land of Israel, specifically in Jerusalem. But that's one allowance. Lakewood, New Jersey would be, well, Lakewood is Eretz Yisrael, right? Okay. Next, to get married is another allowance to leave the land of Israel. If a man or woman is living in Israel and they have not found their shidduch, leaving Israel to get married is also allowed. The next is to save someone who is being oppressed by the Gentiles. You're allowed to leave Israel to go save that person. And the final one is you're allowed to leave Israel in order to make a livelihood. If you cannot make a parnasa, you cannot make your month living in Israel, you would be allowed to leave if you are able to, if you think you're able to do so outside of Israel. Those are the 4 allowances the Rambam gives us. They're quoted from the Talmud. Based on that, the Zera Shimshon now tells us there's a debate in the Talmud. What happens if there's a famine in the land of Israel? Are you allowed to leave Israel or not? Well, based on what we said, you should be able to, because if there's a famine in Israel, well, how are you going to make money to eat and to feed your family? But the Zera Shimshon continues with the Talmud that tells us, even if there's a famine, rather as follows, wait. Even if there is a way to get food, but you do not have money to buy that food, you can still leave Israel. So whether there's a famine or no famine, if you cannot feed yourself, feed your family, you're allowed to leave Israel in order to feed your family. This would seem like common sense, but the reason why the land of Israel was given to the Jewish people was for the intention for us to live there and to fulfill the specific commandments that there is living in the land of Israel. For example, Bikurim, bringing the first fruit. That's a mitzvah, a commandment that was fulfilled in living in the land of Israel. I might not have mentioned this before, but the mitzvah, the commandment of bringing the first fruit, is only on the 7 species of the land of Israel, meaning not any fruit and vegetable, not apples, not oranges, only the 7 great species that the land of Israel was given as a gift. Now let's see, does anyone know the 7 species? Yeah? Wheat, barley, dates, grapes, olives, pomegranate, and figs. Okay? These are the 7. They're fascinating, no? And Rosh Hashanah is coming up with rimon, pomegranates. These are the fruits that the land of Israel was gifted with. And these are the only ones that are brought up. Having said that, if you cannot live in the land of Israel, you cannot eat in the land of Israel, you can leave. The Talmud also quotes to us about Rabbi Yochanan, who recalls a time when there was a famine in the land of Israel, specifically in Tiberias. Who's been to Tiberias? Most of us. Tiberias is a fascinating place. There was a time, in the time of Rabbi Yochanan, this is the time of the Talmud, that there was a famine there, and there was food. It was quite scarce, but no one had any money to buy any food, and people died of starvation. And based on that, the Zera Shimshon says there's 2 completely separate blessings. There's a blessing of having rain and having food available, but also having the money to buy the food. To buy any food, nutritious food, food that can sustain a person. The Zera Shimshon says the Torah is telling us, Et kol ma'aseh yadecha, that God is going to bless all of our handiwork, that not only the rain and the plowing and the fruit produce will give us what to eat, but the money that God will also give us will be blessed. We've spoken about this a couple times, that the blessing that God gives us, or the blessing of money, is not in quantity. It's on exactly what a person is left with. Some people make so much, but they spend more than they make. And God forbid, a person could make and have, and then there could be extra taxes, extra investigation, tickets, things breaking, things being lost. But the person's making so much, but they're left with so little. It's not with how much you make, it's how much are you left with. What type of quality of life are you living? And this is why you can never look at someone else and say, oh, they're making so much, look at that person's salary. But how do you know what their expenses are? How do you know how God calculates what they actually bring home, what they're left with at the end of the year, what they're left with to give over as an inheritance to their children and their grandchildren? These are all things which are divine calculations that we cannot know, and there's no point of us even attempting to know. I wanted to give us a couple tips on the concept of parnasa, the concept of livelihood, coming to Rosh Hashanah, where unfortunately a lot of what we always ask for is health and wealth, health and wealth, health and wealth, right? It's a good thing to ask for, it's a good thing to want. Unfortunately, Rosh Hashanah is not really the place and time to be honing in on health and wealth. Rather, Rosh Hashanah is a day where we are acknowledging the creation of humanity, and what we are doing is we are crowning God, recrowning God, reaffirming God as our King, the King of the world, the King of humanity, the King of the universe. This is the point of Rosh Hashanah. So yes, we sometimes have to slip in health and wealth, success and children and all the things that we need. But that's not the main focus of the day. Mind you, I'm going to quote to you a piece of the Talmud, which is a major eye-opener for each and every one of us. The problem with me telling you this is you're going to maybe now hone in more on the health and wealth, specifically the wealth on Rosh Hashanah. But listen to this. The Talmud at the beginning of the second chapter of Masechet Beitzah tells us that on the day of Rosh Hashanah, a person's livelihood is decided. Between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is when it's decided. It's those 10 days. So yeah, you start praying for Leges on Rosh Hashanah, or really the beginning of Elul, but when it's sealed is on the day of Yom Kippur. That number, that blessing, that quality more than quantity is sealed then. However, there are 3 exclusions to what is in that number. So let's just give a number. Let's be generous. $1 million. Okay? Here to that? I hope I'm not insulting anyone by saying that number. Okay. Now, in that number, there is 3 exclusions. Exclusion number 1 is what a person spends. Write this down if you're taking notes. This is fascinating. What a person spends on celebrating Shabbat. The food that you eat on Shabbat, the ambiance, maybe even the clothes, your special Shabbat clothes. All of that is not included in your big $1 million. Alavai, inshallah. Okay? Next, that a person spends on Yom Tov and Rosh Chodesh. Some of us maybe don't appreciate the new month so specially, but Rosh Chodesh is a Yom Tov in and of itself. And I know there are many people who try to do something special on Rosh Chodesh, whether it means have a special meal or do something special. Anything a person spends on the holidays and on Rosh Chodesh is also not included in that number. And this one I think is the most fascinating, the most important. Whatever a person spends on giving their children a Torah education is also not included in that number. That means tuition, which everybody goes crazy for. This number is not included in the limited. Now, it doesn't mean it's big or small, but the limited number that God gives each and every person is not included in that. So a person with belief, just like we say, when you give your 10%, God gives you many times over. It's being a partner with God. When you really start to live and believe these things, you understand that Shabbat, okay, so we have a cholent this big, a cholent this big, we have a roast this big, we have this amount of guests or that amount of guests. When we're doing it all for Shabbat, or we're doing it for the holiday, or we're doing it for our children's Torah education, this is not things that come off our tab. This is, by the way, one of the greatest struggles and tests that we have in the United States of America today is the tuition crisis. Putting one's child in a Jewish school is thousands and thousands of dollars. It's so easy, it's so tempting to just put your children in public school. Oh, don't worry, they'll be with us on Shabbos. We'll get them on Sunday school. We'll give them a private tutor. We'll do this. Does it happen? No. How many kids do you know that go to and have graduated public school and are completely committed, living a Jewish committed life? I'm not saying just by sending to private school you took care of all your problems, but you are unfortunately handicapping the situation tremendously by sending your kids to a public school. And I don't have anything against the education system. It's just the very, very fact of being in an ambiance, in a surrounding, a Jewish surrounding versus not. Face it, we're different. There are different days of the year we need off, and there's different days of the year we need to be at school. And there are certain laws and regulations and eating habits and philosophies and psychologies that as Jews, as committed Torah Jews, we need. This is something that we could only get in a Jewish environment, in a Jewish school. So it's very hard. We're always fighting against what do I need to spend on Shabbat? What do I need to spend on the holiday? What do I need to spend on the kids' school? These are things which are not part of that grand number. Just as when a person gives charity, they're blessed with more, these numbers are not included. The next piece of Talmud I want to quote is in the beginning of Tractate Ta'anit. It says in the beginning there that God has many messengers, God has many angels, but God himself holds the key to three things. Listen to how amazing this is. There are three things which God holds on, as the Ma'am explains, amongst others, because their amount and their precision needs to be so exact that God could never give this over to any one of his creations to do on his behalf. Listen to the three. Second, where'd it go? Here we go. I want to say it in order of the Gemara. The Gemara says as follows. Number one, Geshamim, rain, which means livelihood. Can you imagine if it would rain too much or too little? We would not have exactly what we need. So in other words, the key of livelihood, the key of parnasah, is held by God. It's directly coming from God. That's number one. Number two is labor, giving birth. It's only God who is there to help a woman when she gives birth and when she recovers. The intensity and the physical condition that a woman goes through when she gives birth, it's God who holds the key in allowing it to happen and helping her recover. And the third is the key to the resurrection, to Techiyat HaMetim, which only God is the one, He Himself, which performs. These three things are held to, the keys are held by God to show us that the precision, that the specialty, that the idea of why does this person have more, why does this person have less, why am I struggling, why do I have so much, why, all of these questions are all in the hands of God. God knows why, God knows how, He knows what. He specifically gives to one what they need for their specific situation, and it's perfectly tailor-made. It's hard to accept sometimes, but when we realize that this is God Himself, we need to go to the source to request for help for it. It's something which is in one aspect a condolence and a salvation. The Talmud in Masechet Brachot gives us a dispute between two great sages, one being the author of the Zohar, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and another, Rabbi Ishmael, who both have a dispute if a person has to put any effort into making a livelihood or not. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says a person should be all or nothing, either all work or all Torah and mitzvot. And Rabbi Ishmael says no, we need to do part of this and part of that. The person needs to learn and fulfill and also work at the same time. So the sages came to a conclusion that they're both right. But it's not for the same person. The overwhelming majority of people go with the latter opinion, that we need a combination in life. You need to work and you need to also fulfill and study. Only great and pious and very high level individuals such as Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, which it's very, very hard to even say that anyone can come close to that, can only be completely devoted to learning Torah and fulfilling mitzvot. It all is based on a person's commitment. If they're really, really using all their time and all their brain power for doing that one thing, then it could work. But if they're not fully committed to it, then a combination is the right way. We see that we need to put in the effort to make a livelihood. It's something which each and every person needs to recognize. Being lazy or sitting back is not what God wants from us. He doesn't want, and most people have the problem of only working and not committing enough time or effort towards godly manners or Torah. So every person needs to know where their strengths and weaknesses are and pay attention to grow that and to make it as successful as possible. The last thing I want to mention, and this, the Pelei Yoetz, a great scholar, wrote, he says as follows, that if a person wants to see parnasa in their life, blessing in their life, when they make the blessings on the food that they eat before and after, they should say so with a lot of concentration. Think of it, when you're going to eat that bread, or you're going to eat that fruit or vegetable, or that snack, or those jelly beans. When you make that blessing, you are now stopping and saying, God, this comes from you. I'm thanking you for this. All God wants, as we said in the beginning, is He wants our attention. He wants us to acknowledge Him as the creator of the world, as the creator of everything we eat. So if before we eat we acknowledge it, we are being blessed. We're blessing what we're eating. After we eat, when we say the after blessing, whether it's Birkat HaMazon or any other type of blessing, when we say that with concentration, when we say that with intention, when we say that pleading to God to keep on helping us and sustaining us, that's how we see blessing in our life. Coming towards Rosh Hashanah, we are less than 2 weeks away. In 2 weeks from now, we will be doing the Havdalah of after Rosh Hashanah. So just to note, next week we will have class, but the following Tuesday night we won't have class. Between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we're going to have to see, because the dates, the times between, I think Yom Kippur starts on a Tuesday night, so there won't be a Tuesday night then either. Right. So please be sure to be here next week for the last Zera Shimshon class for this year. It's going to be Parashat Nitzavim. And try to pay attention over the last less than 2 weeks of the year. When you eat something, you may not have the habit to make a blessing before and or after, but maybe think about it. Oh, there's a beautiful burekas. Make the mezonot. Did you eat enough to make the after blessing? Maybe eat enough to make the after blessing. Sometimes people are lazy. I mean, I love bread, so I don't have a problem doing birkat hamazon. I'll something I enjoy. But some people are always like, oh, let me get the mezonot way out. Let me find an alternative for bread. No, eat the bread. Do the 4 blessings of Birkat HaMazon. Reading the Birkat HaMazon is quoted by sages that is one of the grand sources for blessing and parnasa. Reading it specifically, it said that the Lubavitcher Rebbe promises himself, anyone who reads every word in Birkat HaMazon, they will be wealthy. Now again, it makes a lot of sense. You're thanking God for what He gave you. Doesn't He want to give you more? When your child comes and thanks you for what they gave you, you want to give them more. Same thing. When we thank God for what He gave us, He'll want to give us more. So as a recap for tonight's class, the first concepts we spoke about was that Kohen, any Kohen, that Kohen that is there in front of you, God put him there in front of you for a specific reason. Don't compare him to anyone else. And then the second idea of articulating our gratitude, not only doing the action but articulating it, means and makes all the difference at the same time. And now this bracha, that God blesses us not only with the rain and the produce, but also the money and the finances to be able to purchase and to have that, is two unique blessings. It's a double blessing God gives to each and every one of us. Coming to Rosh Hashanah, we should try to be mindful about these things, and hopefully God will bless us all with a tremendous amount of parnasa, livelihood, in order to have the ability to give back to the needy, to give back to one's community, and to help all of Klal Yisrael, the whole world. Amen ve amen. If there are any questions,